So the very next step in the all-wheel drive S10 build is, of course, to make it actually all-wheel drive, not just four-wheel drive. So the first thing I want to do is get the front differential installed, which I'm really excited about this part because this was a very hard to find and pretty strong front differential. So basically what we need to do is, this is a four-wheel drive cast iron front diff from a Chevy ZR2 S10. It's effectively the same exact thing that's actually in the truck right now, except this one's made of cast iron instead of aluminum like this one. The only problem for all-wheel drive is it has this little disconnect mechanism right here, which will actually interrupt power flow coming out of the differential and out through the axle shaft. They do that to save fuel mileage and a bunch of other stuff. But anyway, this differential here we have because you'll notice there is no disconnect mechanism, and we have a solid one-piece axle shaft that goes from the CV stub all the way into the spider gear. So basically what we are going to do is we're going to combine the strong cast iron center section with the strong and not disconnectable CV axle. This is from an Oldsmobile Bravada, a factory all-wheel drive vehicle. So we combine this half with this half, we put them together. I'm also going to do a little bit of cleanup work. This is, it's a fairly low mile unit from what I've been told. It is a little bit leaky, so we'll throw some new seals on. I'm probably going to split the cases just to kind of give the insides an inspection. I have some new bushings to press in here because these are a little bit tore up. Not too bad, but you know, we're going to go through this just to make it as right as it possibly can. So a little bit of cleanup work, a little disassembly, and we'll get it thrown in the truck. All right, so I don't really need a whole lot from this Bravada differential other than this shaft, of course, but the good thing is this also should be, this is also a 373 ratio, just like the cast iron one. So I'll have a backup just in case something breaks, but I don't think it will since we got the good cast iron case. That's the big problem, is these aluminum cases. They're just kind of so wimpy, they flex and move around. So I'm sure there's an easier way to get this out, but I like taking stuff apart. Basically, I'm going to remove this cross pin so I can get like a punch or something through the end of the carrier and just tap that axle shaft out. It has one of these little spring clip things on there. Ideally, or theoretically, you grab like onto this thing with a slide hammer, but I don't have a slide hammer and I don't want to disturb the spline or mark up the shaft. So all I'm going to do now is pull that bolt, push the cross pin out, tap it out. I initially didn't plan on completely rebuilding this front end. At first, my thought was like, hey, we'll just clean it up and throw it in. But then, you know, that little voice in the back of your head says, what the heck, we're in here, let's do this right. So of course, we now have the front differential completely tore apart, and we are going to completely rebuild it before we put it back together. So, it's going to get new carrier bearings. It's going to get a new pinion bearing, both large and small. It's going to get new roller bearings for the CV axles that engage in there. And it is going to get new seals, of course. The yoke will get that cleaned up. And basically, when we're done, we are going to have a more or less sort of kind of brand new front diff that's going to hold, hopefully, all kinds of power in the front end of this all-wheel drive, soon to be V8 converted S-10 second gen Syclone. Project name to be figured out soon. I still haven't decided what it's actually going to be called. But anyway, yeah, so I'm going to clean this up a little bit further. We put it in the parts washer, and of course there's a little bit of dirt that it just won't get, so we'll brush that out. I'm going to do some completely unnecessary stuff like deburring the inside of this with a carbide, just because that little OCD guy in the back of my head says, do it, we're in here. So we are going to do it. We're not going to regear it. It's got 373s in it, which I really love. The rear end has 373s in it. The main difference between the all-wheel drive and the four-wheel drive, I just kind of wanted to show you now that we have it tore apart. This is the four-wheel drive passenger side axle. This is the all-wheel drive one. Obviously, it's one piece, so power is always flowing through it. Where with a four-wheel drive one, when you are in two-wheel drive mode, the shift collar is slid over to the side, so the power that comes in from the spider gear does not translate into power turning a wheel, where when you engage four-wheel drive, the shift collar kind of slides down, if I can do this one-handed, and then you have sort of kind of a one-piece shaft. But there's a lot going on here that has the potential to fail. It relies on a shift fork and an actuator to engage that, where because they made the all-wheel drive Bravadas, that's the best solution. That's kind of the same thing I did in my Copo truck when we converted it to all-wheel drive, except instead of using Bravada parts, we used Escalade parts. But regardless, one-piece axle, cast iron case. This is going to be probably the strongest possible combination of parts we can put together for a 7¼ inch IFS GM differential. One down. So we got the differential all tore down, 100% cleaned up and deburred, and basically ready to start a fresh assembly on it. But I'm waiting on a couple of bearings to come from various places. I tried to order everything as quick as I could. But anyway, yeah, it's just all sitting under plastic now because it's 100% cleaned up and ready to go back together. So it's going to get all new carrier and pinion bearings. It's going to get new roller bearings for the axles. It's going to get new seals, of course, and then we'll put it back together with the all-wheel drive shaft. And then, of course, we'll put a little paint on it, but the cast iron one is pretty clean. So anyway, while I wait for the bearings to show up in the crush collar, that was the other thing that was the big delay. I'm going to start on the front suspension rebuild, mainly because to get the front diff installed, we're going to have to take a few things apart, but also, you know, it's kind of like while you're in there. That word will get you in trouble, but the steering and suspension on this truck right now up front is super sketch. Like the lower ball joint on the passenger side has got a ton of play in it, and the pitman and idler arm, again, there's a ton of play. This truck is all over the road. It's definitely not something I should be driving until I get this stuff corrected. So that's what I'm going to start on, at least today. We'll get the wheels pulled off. We'll get the lower control arms out because I'm just doing the loaded control arms with a different sway bar spacing for my four-door Blazer sway bar. I will do new upper control arms, new shocks. I already have some CV axles because these are like completely blown out. The boot is just flopping around. We've got grease everywhere, oil leaks everywhere. So we'll try to clean up a fair amount of that stuff. So probably the way the workflow will go is I'll get the suspension tore down. By then my bearings will be here for the front end. We'll get the differential reassembled and probably stabbed back into the truck. And then if I get the rest of my suspension parts, I can start on reassembly, but we may find some more things while we're in there, you know, those dangerous words that we also have to address. So let's just jump right in and see what we can find. I think this might be it, maybe. Oh man, that was not fun. I'm probably gonna regret the mess that I'm about to make, but it's gonna be clean, because it's cleaner. Alrighty guys, I have made a proper mess, but I got just about all the grease off of the frame, especially around the suspension components and stuff like that. It's one of those things I can't stand, like working on stuff. It is like almost every single component in this truck has been leaking, and we're slowly fixing that, and it just gets everywhere. Like the CVs especially, the boots popped and it slung grease all over the bottom of the frame and stuff. So that's mostly what I was getting at. And when I pull the engine out to do the swap a little bit later on, I'll do the same thing like under the hood. I'll get the firewall on the top of the frame and stuff like that. But at least for now, it's gonna look so much better. I gotta go home and get cleaned up. As far as painting, I'm actually not gonna do anything, which is, I fight with myself back and forth about how far to take this stuff. And I just hate like half painted frames and stuff like that. So I'm just gonna kind of let the factory coating or whatever's left on there just combined with a little bit of natural rust on the frame, and that way it'll just kind of match front to back. And then down, like way down the road, if we ever decide to get to the point where we'll pull this thing apart, then we can like sandblast and powder coat it and like make the whole entire frame like spot on. But for now, it's super clean and I am super dirty, so let me go get cleaned up. All right, the spec calls for 11 to 16 inch-pounds. We're pretty much at 11, so I am gonna call that good. So this right here probably represents some of the most unnecessary, but also some of the most satisfying work that I, well, really enjoy doing to a project like this. So unnecessary in the sense that this differential was pretty much ready to go. It was kind of a low mile unit, so it didn't really need a complete rebuild and reseal, but hey, we're in here, we might as well. So it's peace of mind to me, and it's also just, you know, a good practice, I feel like, because if you're going to go through the effort of putting something like this in a truck, it's a fair amount of work to actually disassemble the vehicle and install a new diff. I mean, you might as well know that inside everything is A-OK. It might not have checked out, but it did. So in summary, we have a completely rebuilt GM 7.25 IFS 373 gear cast iron housing from a ZR2 with a Oldsmobile Bravada passenger side one-piece axle that'll work with the all-wheel drive conversion that we are going to do. And then we did some other stuff, like we've got brand new bushings pressed into our passenger side support bracket. I mean, again, didn't really need them, but the old ones, they were a little bit cracked and stuff like that. Of course, we pressed new ones into the housing here as well. Every bearing seal, gasket resealed, ready to go. Couple of tools if you're gonna do this. I'll just give you a brief overview, but if you're really interested in rebuilding differentials, I'll link a couple of videos that I did in great detail showing every last step, because I just kind of breezed through it here. But a couple cool tools I made. This guy here is for threading the side adjusters in. I originally made this for a GM 8.25 IFS. I had to put a little bit of a relief there and there for the 7.25, but handy tool to have. Got to have a dial indicator. You got to have an inch-pound torque wrench for setting pinion preload. So yeah, it's like you're in there, you might as well. So real happy that it's done. Now the hard part, I got to lift that sucker up, figure out the puzzle, kind of remember how I twisted and maneuvered it to get it up in there. Because the only bad thing about this cast iron diff, even though it's really, really strong, it's also a fair amount heavier than the original. All right, we got the truck back down on the ground, or at least sitting on jack stands. We got the front diff installed, looking good, nice and clean in there. Probably can't see it right now. But I'm really happy that we got this step accomplished. I didn't necessarily plan on doing a whole front end rebuild this soon, although I'm glad we're doing it because that stuff was just so bad and so loose, and the truck was probably, if I'm honest, a little bit dangerous to drive. So this is the old parts that we're kind of going to be replacing. We're waiting on new ones. And I just wanted to show you like how much grease and grime and gunk was all over this stuff. Like, I'm glad I took the time to steam clean underneath. It definitely made a mess in the shop. We got most of that cleaned up now, but yeah, it's an old 20-some year old truck. Only had 116,000 miles on it, so I suspect all that stuff is the originals. You know, the ball joints are shot, the bushings are bad, tie rod, like the whole 9 yards definitely needs to be replaced. So that's what we're going to be doing next time. So I've also decided what engine I'm going to put in, but I'm not going to tell you just yet.